First of all, go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear could completely change the way you see the news, and even the future. In recent months, the world has turned its eyes to the Middle East, and Trump's name has once again resonated strongly. The promise? Peace. But is it really peace? Or are we facing what ancient prophecies called the years of false peace? It seems absurd to think that a political agreement could be related to the fulfillment of biblical prophecies, until you realize that every move on the global chessboard follows an ancient, predictable, and, in a way, inevitable pattern. What few understand is that not all peace comes from God, and not all silence is a sign of tranquility. Sometimes the world seems calm just before the storm, and that's where the danger lies. Confusing calm with redemption. Is what we are seeing the harbinger of a new era of harmony, or the beginning of a time prophesied thousands of years ago? There are moments in history when the winds seem to whisper something different. Trump's recent involvement in negotiations with Israel has rekindled a feeling that has long lingered in the air: the promise of lasting peace in the Middle East. But, as every good observer notices, the discourse of peace does not always bring tranquility. Sometimes, it is the silence before the storm. The world vibrates with each diplomatic announcement, without realizing that, behind the scenes, international politics moves like a spiritual chess game. Trump, with his direct and unpredictable style, achieved what many leaders have tried and failed to do: bring together nations that have been at war for generations. This sounds noble, until one notices the invisible price that comes with each handshake. Some see him as an instrument of restoration, others a symbol of something that prophecies have already anticipated: a time when peace would be used as a disguise to prepare for something much greater. And those who follow the scriptures know, when man promises stability, it is wise to look at the celestial clock. But does the world truly understand what is happening? Headlines speak of agreements, treaties, and strategies, but rarely of purpose, because the real battlefield is not only in the deserts of the East, but in the human consciences that decide the course of nations. And when politics begins to touch the threads of prophecy, something within us awakens. That feeling that there is more happening than meets the eye. Bible prophecies and the concept of years of false peace. What does this expression really mean? Since ancient times, prophets have warned of a period when the world would believe it had achieved peace, when in reality it would be heading towards its greatest illusion. This false peace is mentioned in Scripture as a time when men will say, peace and security. But destruction will come suddenly, like birth pangs. The irony is that this warning always seems distant, until events begin to align too precisely to be coincidence. And it is at this point that faith and discernment become more important than the headlines. Prophecies describe not only catastrophes, but also human behavior in the face of them. When the Bible speaks of an agreement that would bring a truce between Israel and the nations, it is not merely describing politics. It is exposing the nature of man who believes he can build peace without God. This apparent peace is like a house built on sand, beautiful on the outside, unstable on the inside. And that is where many go astray, confusing diplomacy with redemption. Think for a moment. How many times has humanity tried to sign its own salvation? From the Tower of Babel to the UN, from ancient pacts to modern treaties, the desire to control destiny always speaks louder than the humility of depending on the Creator. False peace is a reflection of this, man trying to replace the divine promise with his own wisdom. And each time he tries, time seems to accelerate, as if the prophetic clock were taking another step towards the inevitable. The role of world leaders in the gears of the end times: power, manipulation, and destiny. There is a silent pattern that repeats itself in all major turning points in history. Leaders who believe they are in control, when in reality, they are pawns in something much larger. Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, leaders of the Middle East, All move their strategies like generals on a chessboard that appears political, but has spiritual roots. Every speech, every decision, every alliance is part of a plot that did not begin in the White House or in Jerusalem, but in the ancient pages of prophecy. Power, when devoid of divine purpose, is like fire in human hands. It warms for a moment, but destroys afterward. Many rulers seek glory, influence, and dominion, without realizing that the true stage on which they act is invisible. It is the same stage where Pharaoh hardened his heart, where Nebuchadnezzar believed himself to be a god, and where modern kings still stumble into the same trap, that of thinking they control destiny. But in the end, they all fulfill roles that were already written, even without knowing it. And it's curious to observe how nations chase after strong leaders, as if strength meant wisdom. People clamor for political saviors, ignoring that the true king already offered his crown more than 2,000 years ago. This human need for an earthly guide reveals an ancient wound, the fear of chaos. But when fear chooses leaders, power changes hands faster than the world realizes. And perhaps, without realizing it, humanity is paving the way for the final protagonist of this grand script. The difference between political peace and spiritual peace, what the world seeks and what God offers. The world speaks of peace as if it were a prize to be won, but God's peace is not won. It is granted. Political peace is fragile, dependent on agreements, votes, and interests. A single signature is enough to create it, and a single ill-spoken word to destroy it. Spiritual peace, however, the peace Jesus promised, remains even when everything crumbles. That is why many world leaders speak of stability, yet still sleep with restless hearts. Because no human treaty can silence the fear that is born within the soul. Modern man believes that peace will come when wars cease, when the economy stabilizes, when borders are respected. But this is a mirage. When one problem is solved, another arises, like a flame that never goes out. True peace does not depend on the external scenario, but on the inner presence of those who trust in something greater. It is the kind of tranquility that allowed Daniel to sleep among lions, that sustained Paul in prison, and that can still sustain those who choose to believe today. The contrast is stark. Political peace is built with pens and promises. Spiritual peace with surrender and faith. One seeks power, the other purpose. While the world chases after stability, God invites us to rest. And perhaps that is precisely what the world fears. Stopping to listen to the voice that does not fall silent amidst the noise. Because deep down, that is the only voice that could truly change everything. And that is where history challenges us again. What are we choosing to follow? The sound of the crowd or the whisper of truth? What can each person do in the face of this scenario? Discernment, faith, and preparation for what is to come. It's no use knowing about prophecies if the heart remains asleep. The times we live in demand discernment, and discernment is not born of fear, but of intimacy with God. It's easy to get lost in the theories, headlines, and opinions that shout from all sides. But true understanding comes in the silence of prayer, when the spirit calms down and begins to perceive what the eyes cannot see. It is there, in stillness, that discernment flourishes, and the external chaos ceases to dictate the rhythm of the soul. Faith, in this context, is not a refuge of naivete, but a fortress of conscience. To believe does not mean denying what happens in the world, but rather seeing what lies behind it. It is like looking at the raging sea and still knowing that there is firm ground beneath the waves. This faith needs to be nourished every day, by reading the scriptures, surrounding oneself with edifying people, and learning to listen to the right voice when the world speaks too loudly. And above all, it's time to prepare, not with fear, but with wisdom. Prepare your mind to discern deception, your heart to forgive, and your life to serve. Because what lies ahead will not be faced with weapons, but with spiritual understanding. Those who are awake will know how to recognize the signs, and those who are at peace will not be shaken by the noise of the world. After all, the end times are not the end of everything, but the beginning of something that many still do not understand. And now, after all this, stop and think. What has truly guided your perceptions, what God says, or what the world shows? How many times have you believed in a peace that only served to lull your spiritual vigilance to sleep? Perhaps this is the moment to open your eyes, to seek discernment and look beyond appearances, because not all brilliance comes from the light. The prophecies were not written to generate fear, but to awaken awareness. And perhaps the true purpose of this time is to teach us to trust less in human agreements and more in eternal promises. Have you prepared your spirit for what is to come? Have you sought to know the truth, or merely repeated what you hear? Remember, those who know the truth do not despair at the signs. They understand their purpose. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Here, with each new piece of content, you'll understand more about what's happening in the world and, most importantly, within yourself. Because, in the end, the greatest battlefield isn't between nations, it's within each person's soul.